in order to conserve class time for other things, I'm going to talk through quickly a few of the wRAP quiz questions that were missed by teams, and I'm going to save a couple of them for class. So, for example, I'm going to talk about number 4 in class, so I won't talk about that here, and I'll talk about number 10 in class. But anyway, just let's go over the ones that some teams missed, that I don't want to spend class time on. When conducting benefit cost analysis, under what circumstances should the secondary effects of increased employment be counted by the study? And when the newly hired workers live nearby the environmental amenity under study, no, we know that some non-use values might be considered, and there might be secondary effects that warrant consideration. It's not proximity. When newly hired workers are full-time year-round employees, there's a lot of emphasis on the employment effects of projects, and so that's real tempting. But the whole point of this section of the reading is that that's not a great measure. I'm going to hone in on the correct answer. When the unemployment rate in the surrounding region is low, that's not the one, and so it's not the employment effects are not to be considered except in a particular situation. So B and D are wrong for the same reason. So here's the thinking: if unemployment is low, and expanding environmental protection, say of a natural area, increases or in fact decreases employment, that effect should be counted when those workers, in the case of new hires, if those workers are being hired away from other jobs, well, that's not really an impact of that action. On the other hand, if unemployment is really high and people would otherwise be out of work and idle, we'd have idle resources. If those resources are employed, well, then that's worth counting. So it's when unemployment in the surrounding region is high is when we should count the employment effects, the secondary employment effects. And here, the idea here is, let's say, if we were analyzing a proposal to increase logging, there's a certain number of loggers that would be hired. There's a certain number of mill workers that might be hired new, although that's also contentious. I can talk about that another time. But the secondary effects would be that those workers would then go and spend their money at stores, and that increase in business would cause an increase in employment. Well, if unemployment rate is low, those stores would have to hire workers away from other jobs. So it's not really new jobs. It's just a movement of resources and not a net gain. Anyway, so that's an important and maybe a bit on the subtle side point. Let's talk about this number 5 somewhat briefly. This is a simple one. My pen isn't working all that well. Does the EPA's 97 finding that the Clean Air Act had produced net benefits of $21.7 trillion between 1970 and 1990 demonstrate that the Clean Air Act was economically efficient? And the answer here is no. And the reason is that this finding finds that there is a positive net benefit. So that's great. But to be demonstrated as economically efficient, that's a pretty high bar. One would have to prove that no other mix of policies could have yielded even higher net benefits than $21.7 trillion. So just to relate it to that consumer and producer surplus analysis, if we had, let's say that these are the costs and benefits of a particular, the miles of river protected or whatever, just one more unit moving along the quantity axis is one more unit of protection. Anyway, if we, and we'll just not even consider market, we'll just have marginal social values and marginal social costs. Anyway, every unit of protection for which the marginal social cost exceeds the Marshall social value should be enacted. And if, let's say that we're here, just in terms of the liters of cleaner air provided, I don't know, whatever, some quality standard maybe. Let's say we're at Q1. Well, we'd find that there's a big positive net benefit, but we're not at Q star, which would be the economically efficient level of protection. So again, that's maybe a subtle distinction, but an important one. All right, now some of these are just definitional, and it's how good your notes were, and I'm trying to signal to you that, look, you should take good notes. So we have the menu that I can see, but I don't think you can, is sort of obscuring my view here. Let me shift this down for the moment. So hedonic models, that term hedonic is used to indicate a study of values based on prices. So it's estimate how values based on how prices or wages vary. So a good example of this, if we want to consider how valuable the view is, we can do a hedonic study of house prices in areas that have this view. And what we could do is regress the price of a house on number of rooms, square footage, quality of schools, all these variables that we know determine house values, and then we could either do a 0-1 variable, whether the house in question had a view to the amenity in question, or we could even scale it. The houses that had ridge top, full view could be a 5, and a house that was a little bit lower down and had a somewhat obstructed view could be a 4. Anyway, you could do it any number of ways, but the point is that the regression coefficients on those amenity variables would be used to, they would comprise the basis for estimating the value of that amenity. And that's a hedonic model. There's a huge family. Contingent valuation, again, by definition, and there's a whole section in the book on each of these things. Contingent valuation is a particular type of survey. So you ask citizens questions in a very precise way about their valuations. And you try to frame the questions in a way that gets survey respondents to frame their valuations in terms of other stuff they might buy, like, I don't know, groceries or a trip to a fishing reserve or whatever. You try to anchor those. I'll show you an example of those later in the class. And then finally, revealed preference is where we try to estimate values based on things that people actually did. That's just, they've revealed their preference by doing something. And oftentimes, people went and traveled to an amenity and spent money to travel there and to stay at hotels and buy groceries, etc. Maybe not buy groceries, because those they would have bought wherever they were. But anyway, they spent time and energy and money to go and enjoy a particular amenity. So we can infer that their valuation of that amenity must have been at least higher than what they spent to enjoy the amenity, and sometimes on that basis you can estimate values. We'll talk about that. The Vicuzzi study is just, you do need to have an idea of the value of human life. In $86, the range of Vicuzzi values were 3 to 7 million. Obviously, my life is worth billions, but of normal people, maybe that's the range in $86. The only value here in that range, and smack dab in that midpoint, is 5 million. So that's the right answer there. Let me do one more. I think I've got just time in the screencast to do one more. Oops! Wow, all those markings stayed as I tried to move. I guess I have enough room to handle this number 11. I have it in paper right next to me. Which of the following is true? And again, this is, I want you to take good notes. And without belaboring it, D, it turns out that study, I'm still in the, turns out that study found that not only did the change in the energy efficiency rules, the rules mandated a lower level of energy usage for microwave ovens in standby mode. That was the specific rule. Not only did those yield a social benefit in terms of the reduced carbon from the reduced energy production required, but also owners of microwave ovens actually saved more than it cost the manufacturers of the microwave ovens to install the feature, which of course that price is passed on to users. But this is an interesting example. It reveals that there are these lost opportunities in that the market just for whatever reason hasn't captured. There are opportunities just to have a win-win change, and it's probably this information asymmetry. The decision makers in charge of making the increasing energy efficient just aren't aware, perhaps, of the alternative technologies or the energy savings that might be captured. I have a friend who just recently left a job, but his job was to work for a consulting firm, contracting out with Energy Trust of Oregon, and his job was to go around to production sites and just talk with production managers and inventory their production methods. And just with his knowledge of alternative manufacturing equipment in particular, he would then write up a plan for these operations managers to change the way they do things, usually to install some more efficient equipment. And these projects that he would recommend, some of them paid themselves off in just a real short time horizon, like 3 or 4 years. So the energy savings in 3 years would pay for the install of the equipment. That's really low-hanging fruit. Of course, those are undiscounted values, but still the point remains that there's these energy reducing changes in productive capacity that the market has not motivated producers to undertake. And so that's the real low-hanging fruit, and to the full extent possible, we should be out there picking that as a society trying to reduce carbon emissions. I think that gets me through. I'll talk about this number 10 in class.